The crack of Genevieve's hand across Sloane's face sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence of the Gilded Lily. For a frozen second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The wealthiest people in Manhattan just sat there, forks halfway to their mouths, wine glasses suspended in midair, watching a waitress hit the marble floor so hard the impact echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Sloane tasted copper. Her cheek burned like someone had pressed a lit match against her skin. The world tilted sideways, then righted itself. And when she looked up, it wasn't at the woman who just struck her. It was at the man sitting behind her. Lucian Volkov, the Iron King, the most dangerous person in New York City. And he was staring right back. "You pathetic, clumsy rat." Genevieve's voice cut through the silence like breaking glass. The woman stood over Sloane in a red silk dress now stained dark with wine, her face twisted into something ugly and venomous. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This dress is vintage Valentino. I'll have you fired. I'll have you blacklisted from every restaurant in this city. You'll be begging for scraps by morning." Sloane's hands pressed against cold marble. Her knees throbbed. Blood pooled in her mouth where her teeth had cut her cheek. She'd been working 80-hour weeks for 6 months straight, living on gas station coffee and 3 hours of sleep, counting every tip in bathroom stalls during her 10-minute breaks. All of it to pay for the oxygen tanks keeping her 16-year-old brother alive. And now this? Now Genevieve Hartwell, draped in more money than Sloane would see in a lifetime, screaming at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of an expensive shoe. Then Lucian Volkov stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, controlled. Every eye in the restaurant tracked him. He buttoned his charcoal suit jacket with precise fingers, the kind of small gesture that somehow felt massive in the heavy silence. He reached out, and Sloane thought maybe, just maybe, he was going to help her up. But his hand went to Genevieve instead. He took her left hand gently, almost tenderly, and then did something that made the entire restaurant forget how to breathe. He slid the engagement ring off her finger. The massive platinum band with its vulgar diamond came off smooth and easy, like it had never really belonged there in the first place. Genevieve's mouth fell open. Her face went from red to white to purple in the span of 3 seconds. Lucian's voice came out low and quiet, the kind of quiet that was somehow louder than any scream. "You're dismissed, Genevieve. A queen knows how to rule. You only know how to scream." The words hung in the air, like a death sentence. Genevieve started to sputter, to protest, her hands reaching for him, for the ring, for anything to hold on to. "Lucian, this is insane. She's just a waitress. She's nobody. You can't possibly—" Lucian raised one hand, just one. A man materialized from the shadows near the kitchen, moving with military precision. He was built like a freight train, all muscle and scar tissue wrapped in an expensive black suit. "Vane, take her home. She's no longer part of this family." The screaming started then. Genevieve thrashed and clawed as Vane gripped her arm and hauled her toward the exit like she weighed nothing. Her shrieks echoed through the restaurant, bouncing off crystal chandeliers and marble columns, growing fainter and more desperate until the heavy doors swung shut and swallowed the sound whole. The other diners sat frozen, staring, probably already composing the texts they'd send the moment they got to their cars. Lucian looked down at Sloane, really looked at her, for the first time. His eyes were dark, almost black, the kind that saw everything and gave away nothing. He extended his hand. "Get up, Sloane. You've just been promoted." The world tilted again, but differently this time. Sloane stared at his hand, at the ring he still held in his other palm, at the complete impossibility of what was happening. he knew her name. She'd worked at the Gilded Lily for 8 months, and not once had Lucian Volkov acknowledged her existence. Now he was standing over her, hand extended, saying her name like he'd been watching her for far longer than she could comprehend. She didn't take his hand. Something in her refused to. She pushed herself up on shaking legs, her uniform stained with wine and her cheek already starting to swell. "I don't understand." "You will." Lucian pocketed the ring and gestured toward the exit with 2 fingers. Another man appeared, younger than Vane but just as dangerous looking, opening the door to a black SUV idling at the curb. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like sheets of obsidian. "Get in the car, Sloane. We have things to discuss." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered in the same tone someone might use to comment on the weather. Sloane's mind raced through her options. Run, scream, refuse. But what good would any of that do? This was Lucian Volkov. People didn't say no to him and lived to tell the story. And besides, she'd seen something in his eyes when he'd looked at her. Not pity, not desire. Something colder and more calculated. Like she was a chess piece he'd just decided to move. She walked to the SUV on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The interior smelled like leather and cedar and money. The kind of clean, controlled luxury that made her acutely aware of the wine stains on her uniform and the blood in her mouth. The door locks clicked the moment she sat down. Central locking, no escape. Lucian settled into the seat across from her. Scrolling through his phone like kidnapping waitresses was just another item on his evening agenda. The driver pulled away from the Gilded Lily without a word. Through the tinted windows, Manhattan became a blur of neon and shadow, her old life disappearing behind them, 1 block at a time. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands shook in her lap. She wanted to demand answers, to know what was happening. But something told her silence was safer. So she waited. Lucian tossed a manila folder into her lap. The weight of it felt wrong. Too heavy. Too substantial. Sloane caught it on instinct and opened it with trembling fingers. The first page made her stomach drop. Medical records, Remy's medical records, every hospital visit, every treatment, every medication, every bill. Page after page of her brother's fight to stay alive, documented in clinical language that made dying sound like a bureaucratic process. Then came her debts, itemized, totaled, a number so large it made the air leave her lungs. Eviction notices, final warnings from the landlord. And at the very bottom, a letter from the hospital dated 2 days from now, informing her that without immediate payment, Remy's treatment would be discontinued. "How did you—" Her voice cracked and failed. Lucian looked up from his phone, his dark eyes locking onto hers with surgical precision. "I know the hospital's cutting his treatment on Tuesday. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, stage 3. He's been fighting it for 14 months. The experimental therapy was working, but your insurance capped out 6 weeks ago. You've been paying out of pocket, selling everything you own, working yourself into the ground. But it's not enough, is it? It's never going to be enough." Sloane couldn't breathe. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the leather seat like evidence of a crime. "Why do you know this? Why do you care?" Lucian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, closing the distance between them. The space became charged, dangerous, like the air before lightning strikes. "I've already cleared your debt. Every dollar. Your rent is paid through the year, and Remy—" He paused, watching her face carefully, cataloging every reaction. "Remy is being transferred right now to a private surgical wing at St. Jude's. The best oncologists in the world are scrubbing in as we speak. He'll have round-the-clock care, experimental treatments that haven't even entered trial phases yet, everything he needs to survive. To live. The words hit Sloane like physical blows. She stared at this stranger, this man she didn't know, this legend wrapped in expensive suits and darker rumors, and tried to understand why someone like him would save a dying boy he'd never met. "What do you want?" Lucian sat back, satisfied with her reaction. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, different from the one he'd taken from Genevieve. A diamond set in platinum, elegant and cold, a beautiful trap disguised as jewelry. 1 year. That's what I want. 1 year of what? Of you. He said it like it was obvious, like she should have already figured it out. The world thinks I'm a monster, Sloane. They're not entirely wrong. There's a federal investigation circling me right now, prosecutors building a case, media outlets waiting for blood. To win, I don't just need lawyers. I need a story. I need the narrative of the ruthless crime lord who fell in love with a pure-hearted waitress and changed his ways for her. A redemption arc. You play the part. You stay in my house. You attend events on my arm. You smile for cameras. You belong to me, at least in the eyes of the world. In exchange, your brother lives. His treatment never stops. His future is guaranteed. Sloane's hands shook so hard, she had to press them against her thighs to make them stop. And if I say no? Lucian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been regret if men like him were capable of feeling such things. Then you bury your brother on Thursday. The words landed like a death sentence. Sloane looked down at the ring in his palm. At the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She thought about Remy's laugh, the way his whole face lit up when she visited, even though the treatments made him sick. Even though he was 16 and dying and still tried to joke about it to make her feel better. She thought about last week when he'd held her hand, his fingers so thin she could feel every bone, and whispered that it was okay if she couldn't save him, that she'd tried and that was enough. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Sloane reached out with a steady hand and took the ring from Lucian's palm. It was heavier than it looked, cold against her skin. She slid it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like he'd known her size all along. Like he'd been planning this for weeks or months, or however long it took to gather all those medical records and financial statements and pieces of her life. 1 year, she said, her voice hollow and distant. 1 year, Lucian agreed. He leaned back against the leather seat, satisfaction settling over his features like a mask he'd just put on. Through the tinted window, Manhattan blurred past, the city lights smearing into abstract shapes. Welcome to the Volkov family, Fiancée. The SUV turned off the main road, heading north into darker territory where streetlights became sparse and buildings gave way to trees. Sloane pressed her hand against the window, watching her reflection stare back at her. A stranger wearing a diamond shackle. A girl who'd just sold herself to save the only person she had left to love. She didn't recognize herself anymore. Maybe that was the point. The Volkov estate appeared through the trees like something out of a nightmare dressed as a dream. Gothic stone walls rose 3 stories high, crowned with iron spikes and security cameras that tracked their approach with blinking red eyes. Armed guards in tactical gear stood at regular intervals, their faces hidden, their weapons visible. The mansion itself looked like it had been transplanted from old European nobility, all towers and arched windows and gargoyles perched on corners like they were watching for invaders. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress, a prison, a place where people went in and didn't come back out. The SUV passed through 3 separate security checkpoints, each one more intimidating than the last, before finally pulling into a circular driveway lit by iron lanterns that threw dancing shadows across manicured lawns. Lucian stepped out first, buttoning his jacket with those same precise movements, and Sloane followed on legs that didn't quite feel like they belonged to her anymore. The night air was colder here, away from the city's warmth, and it smelled like pine trees and gunpowder and fear. Vane waited at the entrance, his massive frame filling the doorway. He nodded to Lucian, then let his eyes slide over Sloane with all the warmth of someone evaluating livestock at auction. "Everything's secure, boss. The girl's suite is ready." "Good." Lucian gestured for Sloane to follow him inside. The interior matched the exterior's promise of controlled intimidation. Marble floors stretched in every direction, polished so clean they reflected everything like black mirrors. Dark wood paneling climbed the walls, interrupted by oil paintings of stern-faced men in military uniforms who seemed to judge everyone who walked past. A grand staircase swept upward, splitting into 2 wings that disappeared into darkness. Staff moved through the space like ghosts, maids in black dresses and men in suits who looked more like soldiers than servants. None of them made eye contact. None of them smiled. They just moved through their tasks with the efficiency of people who'd learned that survival meant staying invisible. An older woman emerged from a side corridor, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her face lined with years of witnessing things better left unspoken. She wore a simple black dress and sensible shoes, and when her eyes met Sloane's, there was something almost pitying in them. Something that said she'd seen this story before and knew how it usually ended. "This is Elena," Lucian said. "She runs the household. If you need anything, ask her." Elena inclined her head slightly, the gesture containing more respect than Sloane had received from anyone in months. "Miss Ashford." Her accent was faint, Eastern European maybe, and her voice carried the weight of someone who'd survived things that would have broken lesser people. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Sloane could hear. "Survive the first week, girl. After that it gets easier. Or you get numb. Same difference." Before Sloane could respond, Lucian was already moving again, leading her up the staircase and down a hallway that seemed to stretch forever. Doors lined both sides, all of them closed. All of them hiding secrets Sloane probably didn't want to know. He stopped at the last door, pushed it open, and revealed a suite that was larger than the apartment Sloane had shared with Remy before the medical bills forced them into something smaller and cheaper and sadder. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in silk sheets that probably cost more than her car. A walk-in closet stood open, already filled with designer clothes in her exact size, dresses and shoes and jewelry that she'd only ever seen in magazines. A private bathroom with marble counters and a bathtub big enough to drown in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, and beyond them, the dark outline of woods that went on forever. "This is yours," Lucian said, watching her take it all in, "for the duration of our arrangement." Sloane walked to the closet, running her hand along a dress she recognized from a fashion spread she'd seen while waiting in a hospital lobby. Something that cost more than she'd made in half a year of double shifts. "You planned this before tonight. You've been watching me. I've been watching a lot of people." Lucian leaned against the doorframe, his posture casual but his eyes sharp and cataloging. "You were the only one worth investing in. Why?" She turned to face him, needing to understand, even though she suspected the answer would just lead to more questions. "Why me? You could have anyone. Someone from your world. Someone who knows how to play these games. Because your world is real." Lucian pushed off the doorframe, straightening to his full height. You work for what you have. You sacrifice for the people you love. You don't take anything for granted. That's the story I need to tell Sloane. That's the narrative that saves me. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, and Sloane's phone buzzed in her pocket. I've given you access to Remy's medical updates. Live vitals, treatment schedules, everything. You'll know he's safe. It was a small mercy, but it cracked something in Sloane's chest that had been holding her together. She looked down at her phone, at the stream of data already coming through. Remy's heart rate, steady and strong. His oxygen levels, better than they'd been in months. The medications being administered, things with names she couldn't pronounce, but that represented hope in chemical form. He was stable. He was alive. He was going to stay that way. When she looked up, Lucian was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something between calculation and something softer. Something that disappeared the moment she met his eyes. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start the performance. The rules are simple. Don't leave the estate without permission. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. Don't trust anyone, including me. Especially me. He left, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt final. Sloane stood alone in the enormous suite, surrounded by luxury that felt like a cage lined with velvet. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass, staring out at the darkness beyond the estate walls. Somewhere out there was her old life, her crumbling apartment with the broken heater and the neighbors who played music too loud. Her double shifts at the Gilded Lily, smiling at people who looked through her like she was furniture. Her freedom, such as it was. And somewhere across the city, in a hospital room that didn't smell like death anymore. Remy was breathing easier because she'd made a deal with someone who might actually be the devil. Sloane touched the ring on her finger, turning it slowly. The diamond caught the light from the gardens below, throwing fractals across the ceiling in patterns that looked almost like prison bars. Beautiful. Cold. A promise and a trap all at once. She didn't sleep that night. Sleep felt too much like surrender. Instead, she sat by the window and watched the guards make their rounds, tracked the security cameras as they swept their programmed patterns, counted the hours until dawn arrived and her new life officially began. When gray light finally crept through the windows, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Breakfast. Main dining room. 20 minutes. Sloane dressed in jeans and a simple sweater from the closet, refusing the designer options hanging there like accusations. If she was going to be a prisoner, she'd at least choose her own uniform. She found her way downstairs by following the smell of coffee and the quiet murmur of staff moving through their morning routines. The dining room looked like something from a period drama, so high ceilings and expensive art and a table long enough to seat 20 people. Lucian sat at the head of it, already dressed in a three-piece suit despite the early hour, reading something on a tablet while he sipped espresso from a cup so small it looked ridiculous in his hands. He glanced up when she entered. Sit. Sloane chose a chair 3 seats away, close enough to be polite, far enough to maintain some illusion of distance. A man in a white chef's jacket appeared from nowhere and set down plates without a word. Eggs cooked perfectly, toast that was actually still warm, fruit that looked like it had been picked that morning. Things Sloane hadn't had time to eat in months, maybe years. They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds the clink of silverware and the distant hum of the estate coming to life around them. Lucian seemed content to ignore her, his attention focused on whatever financial reports or criminal operations he was reviewing on his tablet. But then, without looking up, he spoke. Tell me, Sloane, do you believe in redemption? She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. Is that what you want? Redemption? I want to survive. He set down the tablet and finally met her eyes. The difference between surviving and being redeemed is mostly just words people use to feel better about themselves. Sloane set down her fork, choosing her next words carefully. I believe in survival. Redemption is something you earn after you've lived long enough to deserve it. It's a luxury, not a right. Something shifted in Lucian's expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition of someone who understood how the world actually worked instead of how people pretended it did. That's a better answer than most people give. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened just slightly. Change of plans. There's an event tonight, a charity gala. We're making our public debut as a couple. Tonight? Sloane's pulse quickened. I've never been to anything like that. You will be trained. Lucian stood buttoning his jacket with those same precise movements that somehow made everything he did look choreographed. A stylist will arrive at noon, media coach at 2. By tonight, you'll know exactly what to say, how to stand, how to make them believe this is real. He walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. And Sloane? It needs to be convincing. If they think you're afraid of me, the narrative falls apart. He left her alone in the massive dining room, surrounded by too much food and too much silence. Sloane looked down at her hands, at the ring that caught the morning light streaming through windows tall enough to make her feel small. She wondered how you were supposed to pretend to love someone who'd bought you like property. The day passed in a blur of preparations that felt more like boot camp than beauty treatments. The stylist was a severe woman named Margot who spoke in clipped sentences and treated Sloane's body like raw material that needed correcting. Hair extensions that added length and weight Sloane wasn't used to. Makeup lessons that involved more products than she'd owned in her entire life. 3 different dresses before settling on midnight blue silk that hugged curves Sloane didn't know she had and made her look like someone else entirely. Shoes that added 4 inches of height and felt like walking on knives. Jewelry that was probably insured for more than a small country's annual budget. The media coach was somehow worse. A former public relations executive named Richard, who drilled her on sound bites and safe topics and how to deflect uncomfortable questions with grace. He made her practice touching Lucian's arm at just the right moment to signal affection without seeming desperate. He made her smile at herself in a mirror for 20 minutes straight until it looked natural instead of forced. Remember, Richard said in his clinical, detached tone, you're not just his fiancée. You're his salvation story. You're proof that even monsters can be tamed by love. The public wants to believe in redemption because it makes them feel better about their own choices. Believe it yourself, and they will too. By the time the black SUV arrived to take them to the gala, Sloane felt like she'd been hollowed out and refilled with someone else's programming. She descended the staircase carefully in her impossible heels, one hand on the railing for balance, and found Lucian waiting in the foyer. He wore a tuxedo that probably cost more than her yearly rent, his dark hair pushed back from his face, a single platinum cufflink catching the light. When he saw her, he went very still. You look different, he said finally. So do you. Something that might have been a smile touched his mouth and disappeared. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Sloane took it. His muscles were solid beneath the expensive fabric, and he smelled like cedar and something darker, something that reminded her of gunpowder and leather. They walked to the SUV together, and for the cameras already flashing at the gates, For the paparazzi who'd somehow learned about tonight, despite all of Lucian's security measures, they looked perfect. A fairy tale in expensive clothes. Beauty and the Beast remixed for modern Manhattan. The gala was being held at a museum, all vaulted ceilings and marble columns, and art worth more than most people would see in several lifetimes. Manhattan's elite filled the space in their designer best, air-kissing and networking, and pretending their money made them better than everyone else. Sloane's anxiety spiked the moment they walked in, her heart hammering against her ribs, but Lucian's hand found the small of her back. Steady. Grounding. "Breathe," he murmured. Too low for anyone else to hear. "You've survived worse than this." And somehow, impossibly, that helped. They moved through the crowd, like royalty making their rounds. Lucian introducing her to politicians and businessmen and old money families who smiled with too many teeth. Sloane deployed her practiced responses, smiled at the right moments, laughed softly when appropriate. She felt Lucian's eyes on her throughout the night, assessing, cataloging her performance. When a photographer asked them to pose together, he pulled her close with one hand at her waist, the other lifting her chin gently. "Look at me," he said, loud enough for the cameras, but soft enough to feel intimate. "Not them. Me." Sloane met his dark eyes, and for a moment forgot about the performance entirely. The cameras flashed like lightning, capturing something that felt more real than it should have. Later, standing on a balcony overlooking the city while holding champagne she wasn't drinking, Lucian spoke without looking at her. "You did well tonight. I'm a fast learner." Sloane set down her glass on the stone railing. "When survival depends on it, you learn fast or you don't survive." I noticed. He turned to her then, and something in his expression had shifted. Less guarded, maybe, more honest. "The world will eat this up. By morning, every tabloid will have us on the cover. The beast tamed by love. It's perfect." "Is that all this is to you?" Sloane asked quietly. "A story?" Lucian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face like he was looking for something specific and wasn't sure he'd find it. "For now? Yes. Ask me again in 6 months." Before Sloane could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed in an instant. Tension flooded his shoulders, his jaw tightening, his hand moving unconsciously toward his jacket where she suspected he kept a weapon. "We need to leave. Now." "What's wrong? I'll explain in the car." He gripped her arm, not hard but firm enough that she knew this wasn't negotiable, and guided her back through the gala with polite efficiency that fooled everyone around them into thinking nothing was wrong. Once they were in the SUV, Lucian made a call, his voice low and sharp. "Vane. Status." Sloane couldn't hear the response, but whatever Vane said made Lucian's expression darken even further. He hung up and turned to her. "When we get back to the estate, I need you to go straight to your suite and lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "Why? What's happening?" "Someone made a move on our territory tonight while we were at the gala. Russians, most likely. Testing our defenses to see how we'd respond." His eyes met hers, and they were cold, completely different from how he'd looked at her on the balcony minutes ago. "Stay in your room, Sloane. This is the part of my world you don't want to see." The SUV raced through the night streets, taking turns too fast, running lights that had already turned red. By the time they reached the estate, Sloane could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Guards were repositioning, weapons visible now instead of concealed, moving with the coordinated precision of people who'd trained for exactly this scenario. Vane met them at the door, his face grim and set in hard lines. They hit the east perimeter, he reported in clipped military tones. "Small team. Professional-grade equipment. We've got 2 in custody, 3 dead, but what?" Lucian's voice was ice wrapped in steel. "2 got inside before we locked it down. They're still in the house." Lucian's hand went to the small of his back, pulling a handgun from concealment with practiced ease that said he'd done this 1,000 times before. "Get her upstairs. Now." Vane grabbed Sloane's arm with a grip that would probably leave bruises, half dragging her toward the staircase as Lucian moved in the opposite direction, toward the east wing where shadows seemed to move wrong. She wanted to protest, wanted to understand what was happening and why her new life had turned violent less than 24 hours after it started. But Vane's grip was iron, and his face said arguing would be pointless. "Listen to me," Vane said as they climbed the stairs 2 at a time. "Stay in your room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except Lucian or me. Do you understand?" Sloane nodded because her voice had stopped working. Vane deposited her at her suite, waited until he heard the lock click into place, then disappeared back down the hallway at a run. Sloane stood in the dark, her heart pounding so hard it hurt, still wearing the midnight blue gown and impossible heels from the gala, feeling absurd and terrified and completely useless. Then the lights cut out. Emergency lighting kicked in half a second later, bathing everything in red that made the whole estate look like it was bleeding. Somewhere below, she heard shouting. Gunfire and quick, controlled bursts that echoed through the stone walls, the sound of breaking glass. Sloane backed away from the door, her hands shaking, and grabbed a letter opener from the desk because it was better than nothing, even though she knew it was useless. She kicked off the heels and pressed herself into the corner farthest from the door. More gunfire, closer this time, footsteps running past her door. A scream that cut off abruptly. Sloane's breath came in short gasps that she tried to quiet because maybe if she was silent enough, they wouldn't know she was here. The hallway went quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something was about to happen. Then she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, stopping right outside her door. The handle turned. Locked. A pause that lasted forever. Then the door exploded inward. The lock mechanism shattered by a silenced gunshot that was somehow louder than all the chaos before it. 2 men entered, dressed in black tactical gear that made them look inhuman, their faces hidden behind masks. They moved with military precision, sweeping the room with weapons that tracked every shadow. One spotted her, raised his weapon, and then Lucian was there. He came through the doorway like violence, given human form, moving so fast Sloane barely tracked it. His first shot took the nearest intruder in the chest before the man could turn. The second spun, firing wild, but Lucian was already moving, closing distance instead of creating it. Hand-to-hand combat in the red emergency light, brutal and efficient and terrifying to watch. A knife flashed in the dark, the intruder's blade slashing out, and it caught Lucian across the ribs. She saw blood, saw his shirt tear open, but he didn't even slow down. His hand closed around the man's wrist, twisted with a crack she heard from across the room, and the knife fell. One brutal strike to the throat and the intruder dropped, choking on his own crushed windpipe. Lucian stood there in the red light, breathing hard, blood soaking through his white shirt in an expanding stain. His eyes found Sloane in the corner, wild and dangerous, and for a moment she saw exactly what the rest of the world feared. The monster, the Iron King, the man who killed without hesitation. Then his knees buckled. Sloane moved without thinking. She crossed the room and caught him before he hit the floor, her arms barely able to support his weight. "You're hurt." Flesh wound. His voice was tight with pain he was trying to hide. Had worse. That's not a flesh wound, you idiot. She maneuvered him toward the bed, the midnight blue gown tearing as she knelt beside him. Take off your shirt. Little forward, don't you think? He tried to smile, failed, winced instead. Sloane ignored him, unbuttoning his shirt with shaking fingers. The knife wound was deep and jagged, running from his lower ribs across his abdomen. Blood pulsed with each heartbeat, dark and steady. She pressed her hands against it, applying pressure, and Lucian hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. I need supplies. Medical kit, sutures, antibiotics. Bathroom, under the sink. Elena keeps emergency kits in every room. Sloane ran, found the kit, military-grade and extensive, and ran back. Lucian had propped himself against the headboard, his face pale but his eyes alert and tracking her movements. He watched as she laid out supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who'd learned field medicine out of necessity rather than choice. You know how to do this, he observed. I know how to keep someone alive when hospitals aren't an option. Sloane threaded a curved needle with silk suture, her hands steadier now that she had a task to focus on. Remy had complications. Post-surgery infections, reactions to medications, things that happened in the middle of the night when calling an ambulance meant bills we couldn't pay. I learned. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with antiseptic that made Lucian's jaw clench, stitching it closed with small, precise movements she'd practiced on oranges and chicken breasts before she'd ever touched her brother's skin. Lucian didn't flinch, didn't make a sound beyond controlled breathing, just watched her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Outside, the sounds of fighting had stopped. Either Vane had secured the estate, or they were about to have much bigger problems. Why help me? Lucian asked finally, his voice rough. I'm the man who bought you. Sloane tied off the last suture, cut the thread, and met his eyes. I don't care who you are to the world. I care that you're the only person who didn't let my brother die. Something shifted in Lucian's expression. His hand came up almost involuntarily, and his fingers tangled in her hair. He pulled her closer, his eyes searching hers for something he seemed desperate to find. You're the only thing in this house that isn't a lie, Sloane. The space between them charged with electricity. His eyes dropped to her mouth. She forgot how to breathe. The world narrowed to this moment, this man covered in blood, this impossible thing building between them that neither of them had planned for. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment like dropped glass. Lucian pulled back, grabbing the phone with his free hand, while his other stayed tangled in her hair like he wasn't quite ready to let go. Vane. Talk to me. Sloane couldn't hear the response, but she watched Lucian's face harden into something cold and businesslike. He released her, pushed himself to standing despite her protest and the fresh blood seeping through the bandages, and buttoned his ruined shirt over everything like he could hide the damage. I need to handle this. Stay here. Lock the door after I leave. You just got stitched up. Sloane. He cupped her face with one hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone where Genevieve had slapped her what felt like a lifetime ago. I'll be fine. You did good work. He left, pulling the door closed behind him. Sloane locked it with shaking hands and stood there surrounded by bloody gauze and medical supplies, still wearing a torn designer gown worth thousands of dollars, trying to understand how her life had become this in less than 24 hours. She cleaned up mechanically, changing into pajamas, washing blood from her hands that wasn't hers. When she finally crawled into bed, exhaustion crashed over her in waves that pulled her under. But her mind kept returning to the moment before the phone rang. to the way Lucian had looked at her, to the way she'd almost wanted him to close that distance. She fell asleep to the sound of her phone buzzing with Remy's vitals. Stable, strong, alive. A reminder of why she was here and why she'd stay. If you're watching this, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next part of this story is going to shock you even more. Drop a comment below about what you think Sloane should do next. Should she trust Lucian? Is Vane really loyal? Your thoughts inspire us to keep bringing you stories like this. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep this community growing. Morning came too bright and too early. Sloane woke to Elena knocking softly, entering with a breakfast tray and a knowing look that said she'd seen this pattern play out before with other girls in other circumstances. He asked me to check on you. Make sure you weren't traumatized by last night. I'm fine. Sloane sat up, accepting coffee gratefully. Is he okay? Mr. Volkov doesn't do okay. He does functional and lethal. Elena straightened the curtains with efficient movements. But yes, he's in meetings all morning. He said to tell you the estate is secure and you're free to move around, within reason. What's reason? Don't leave the grounds. Don't go into the East Wing. Don't ask the guards questions. Elena paused at the door. And if I were you, I'd stay away from his office today. He's in a mood. Sloane spent the day exploring the estate within Elena's parameters, mapping the space like she was planning an escape she knew she'd never actually attempt. The library was massive, floor-to-ceiling books, many of them first editions worth more than cars. The gardens were beautiful in daylight, manicured and peaceful. A strange contrast to last night's violence. She found a gym, a home theater, a room full of weapons displayed like art that made her stomach turn. She also found herself drawn back to the question that had been haunting her since she'd found that burner phone in Lucian's drawer when she'd grabbed the medical kit. Who had access to his private spaces? Who could have planted it there? In the afternoon, she watched from a window as Vane trained guards in the courtyard. He moved with brutal efficiency, correcting stances, demonstrating takedowns that looked like they could kill if you added just a bit more pressure. He'd been with Lucian for 15 years, according to Elena. The most trusted man in the organization. The one person Lucian never questioned. So why did something feel wrong? That evening, Lucian emerged from his meetings looking exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. He found Sloane in the library, curled up with a book she wasn't really reading, and dropped into the chair across from her with a heaviness that made him seem older than he probably was. How's the wound? Your stitching is holding. He rubbed his face with both hands. Thank you. Again. You're welcome. She set down the book. Can I ask you something? You can ask. I might not answer. Last night. The attack. Do you know who sent them? Lucian's eyes sharpened, his exhaustion disappearing behind calculation. Why? Because it felt personal. They went straight for your private wing, not the valuables or the exits or anything else worth stealing. They wanted you specifically. That's usually how these things work. He stood, wincing slightly despite trying to hide it. Don't worry about it, Sloane. It's handled. But it wasn't handled. That night, Sloane couldn't sleep again, her mind returning obsessively to the burner phone, to the message she'd seen. The girl is in place. Execute the king tonight. Someone in this house wanted Lucian dead, and whoever it was thought she was part of the plan. Around midnight, when the estate had gone quiet and she was sure Lucian was downstairs in his office, she made her decision. She slipped into the master's suite, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give her away, and found the drawer. The phone was still there, tucked under documents that looked important and official. She turned it on with shaking hands. One message, sent 3 days before the attack. The girl is in place. Execute the king tonight. Ice flooded through her veins. She photographed the message with her own phone, put everything back exactly as she'd found it, and fled to her room. Someone wanted Lucian dead. Someone close enough to have access to his private spaces. Someone he trusted. And they thought she was their insurance policy. Sloane spent the next 2 days watching everyone with new eyes. The staff, the guards, Vane. She noted patterns, disappearances, private conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. And slowly, piece by piece, the picture came together in ways that made her sick. Vane, always there, always loyal, always perfectly positioned. He'd been the one to secure her suite the night of the attack. Had he been making sure she was isolated, trapped, unable to interfere? He took calls at odd hours, stepped away during shift changes when he thought no one was paying attention. And when she managed to position herself near the security room door, listening without being seen, she heard his voice. Low, careful, conspiratorial, patience. The investigation is our cover. When he's exposed, when he's vulnerable, we move. A woman's voice responded, one that made Sloane's blood run cold with recognition. Make sure the girl doesn't interfere. If she becomes a problem, handle it. Genevieve. Sloane backed away from the door, her mind racing. Vane wasn't working for Russians. He was working with Genevieve, or more likely with her father. One of the old money families Lucian had displaced when he'd built his empire from nothing. They were using the federal investigation as cover, planning a coup from the inside. And she, Sloane, was supposed to be their unwitting accomplice. The innocent fiancée who'd testify against him, or disappear, or serve whatever purpose their plan required. She had to tell Lucian. But how? Vane monitored all the security systems. He controlled the guard rotations. He knew everything that happened in this house. And Lucian trusted him completely. 15 years of loyalty creating a blind spot that was about to get him killed. That night, Lucian had meetings that ran late. Sloane waited in her suite, rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd convince him that his most trusted ally was planning to put a bullet in his head. Around midnight, she heard his footsteps in the hallway, heading toward the master suite. She had to do this now, but she'd seen Elena deliver medication earlier. Something for pain and inflammation from the wound that was healing slower than it should. He'd be sluggish, his reflexes compromised, maybe too slow if Vane made his move tonight. Sloane made her decision. She'd wake him gently, tell him everything she'd discovered, and they'd figure out the next steps together. She crept down the hallway to the master's suite, pushed open the door carefully, and found Lucian in bed. One arm thrown over his face, breathing deep and even. Vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him, the monster transformed into just a man who was tired and hurt and trusting his medication to keep him safe. She approached the bed, hand extended to shake his shoulder gently. The door behind her kicked open with explosive force. Sloane spun around. Vane stood in the doorway, a silenced pistol in his hand. His face completely expressionless. Behind him, dressed in dark designer clothes and wearing a smile like a knife, stood Genevieve. Well, Genevieve purred, stepping into the room with the confidence of someone who'd already won. Isn't this cozy? The monster and his pet waitress. Playing house. Vane's gun tracked from Sloane to Lucian's sleeping form with professional precision. I'm sorry, boss. This is just business. Nothing personal. Lucian stirred. the medication making him slow, his eyes cracking open with confusion that turned to comprehension, that turned to betrayal, all in the span of 3 seconds. He saw Vane with the gun, saw Genevieve with her victorious smile, saw Sloane standing between them. Vane. His voice was rough with sleep and something that might have been heartbreak if men like him allowed themselves to feel such things. After everything we've been through, 15 years. After everything, you're still a liability. Vane's tone was almost regretful, like he actually felt bad about murdering the man who trusted him with his life for a decade and a half. The Hartwell family made a better offer, cleaner leadership, better connections. Without you, the empire can actually grow beyond this outdated street-level operation. Genevieve moved closer to Sloane, her eyes glittering with malice. She's a witness, Vane. Kill them both. Make it look like a murder-suicide. The monster killed his innocent fiancée and then himself, consumed by guilt. She reached for Sloane's hand, trying to grab the ring. I want that back. You filthy piece of garbage. You never deserved to wear it. Sloane jerked away, her mind racing through impossible options. Lucian was reaching for his weapon, but it wasn't there. Vane had already removed it, had planned every detail perfectly. The medication made Lucian's movements sluggish, imprecise, slower than they needed to be. Vane's finger tightened on the trigger, the barrel aimed at Lucian's head with the steady confidence of someone who'd done this before. Time slowed down the way it does, right before everything changes. Sloane remembered the nightstand. Lucian's backup piece, the one she'd seen him hide after the first attack, the one he thought was his secret. Her hand moved. Vane's voice came out final and cold and certain. Goodbye, boss. Bang. The sound exploded in the close space, deafening and absolute. Sloane's hands shook violently, the gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel like a ghost. In front of her, Vane stumbled backward, shock frozen on his face, like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. A red bloom spread across his chest, right over his heart, dark and spreading fast. His weapon clattered to the floor. He looked down at himself, then at Sloane, as if seeing her for the first time. As if realizing too late that he'd underestimated the wrong person. Then he collapsed. Genevieve's scream shattered the silence. She lunged at Sloane, nails extended like claws, but Lucian was suddenly there despite the medication, despite the healing wound. Moving with lethal speed, born from 15 years of surviving when smarter people would have died. He caught Genevieve's wrist mid-swing, twisted it behind her back with a crack that might have been bone-breaking, and slammed her face first into the wall hard enough that the plaster cracked and left a small crater. Vane! Genevieve shrieked, thrashing uselessly. Help me! Kill her! Kill them both! Do your job! Boots thundered in the hallway. Guards flooded the room, weapons drawn. And Sloane watched through a haze of shock and adrenaline as Lucian gave crisp orders in a voice that allowed no argument. Loyal guards, the ones Vane hadn't managed to corrupt, hauled Genevieve away as she screamed threats and obscenities that got fainter as they dragged her down the hall. Other guards surrounded Vane's body, checking for a pulse they wouldn't find, already calling for cleanup crews. Sloane stood frozen, the gun still in her hands, her entire body shaking. She'd killed someone. She'd looked another human being in the eye and pulled the trigger and watched the life leave them like air escaping a balloon. Her knees started to buckle. Lucian caught her before she hit the floor. His arms came around her, taking the gun gently from her hands, pulling her against his chest. Breathe, Sloane. Just breathe. You're safe now. I killed him. Her voice sounded far away, disconnected from her body. I shot him. I didn't even think. I just moved and now he's dead and I... You saved my life." Lucian's hand cradled the back of her head, his voice rough against her hair. "He was going to execute me, and you stopped it. You protected what's yours. I'm not yours." But it sounded like a lie even to her own ears. Lucian pulled back just enough to look at her face, his eyes searching hers. "Aren't you?" Before she could answer, Elena appeared with a blanket and a cup of something that smelled medicinal and probably contained enough sedatives to knock out a horse. "Drink this." She wrapped the blanket around Sloane's shoulders with surprising gentleness. "It'll help with the shock." The next hours passed in a blur of procedures and protocols. Federal agents arrived because gunfire in wealthy neighborhoods always brought federal agents. But Lucian's lawyers were already there, already spinning the narrative with a kind of practiced efficiency that suggested this wasn't their first time. Home invasion. Attempted assassination by a trusted lieutenant who'd been turned by rival organizations. Evidence of Vane's communications with the Hartwell family appeared like magic. Phone records and wire transfers and encrypted messages that painted a clear picture of betrayal and greed. Genevieve's screaming confession didn't hurt their case. Neither did the burner phone Sloane had photographed, which turned out to be just one piece of a larger conspiracy involving half a dozen corrupted guards and 3 members of Lucian's financial team. The federal investigation that was supposed to destroy Lucian instead became his vindication, proof that he was the victim of coordinated attacks by old money families trying to reclaim territory they'd lost to someone they considered an outsider. By dawn, the estate was quiet again. Bodies removed, evidence cataloged, statements given and recorded and filed away. Sloane sat in the library wrapped in Elena's blanket, staring at nothing, trying to feel something other than the strange numbness that had settled over her like fog. Lucian found her there as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene given what had just happened. He looked exhausted, his shirt still spattered with Vane's blood, his face drawn with a grief he wouldn't name because men like him didn't admit to feeling grief over necessary betrayals. The contract was 1 year. He sat beside her on the leather sofa, leaving space between them. "After tonight, you don't owe me anything. You can walk away." Sloane looked at him, this man who'd bought her debt and saved her brother and been willing to die rather than let someone else get hurt protecting him. "What about Remy?" "His care continues. Forever. That was never contingent on you staying." Lucian reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. Not the one on her finger, but a small velvet box she'd never seen before. He opened it to reveal a simple platinum band, elegant and understated, nothing like the showy diamond he'd given her that first night. "I won't trap you anymore, Sloane. You're free." He slid the engagement ring off her finger himself, replaced it with nothing. The weight she'd grown used to was suddenly gone, leaving her finger feeling naked and strange. "I'll have someone drive you wherever you want to go. Your apartment, a hotel, anywhere in the world. Just say the word." He stood, started to walk away, and Sloane finally felt something through the numbness. Loss, fear, the terrifying realization that walking away meant losing something she hadn't known she needed until it was being taken away. "Wait." Her voice stopped him at the doorway. "What if I don't want to leave?" Lucian turned slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile thing was building between them. "Why would you stay?" Sloane stood, letting the blanket fall. "Because in the last week, I've seen who you really are. Not the monster the world sees, but the man who pays for a dying boy's treatment before negotiating the price. The man who fires his fiancée for hitting a waitress. The man whose first instinct when guns are drawn is to protect someone he barely knows." She stepped closer. "You gave me a future, Lucian. But I think I gave you something too. What? A reason to want redemption instead of just survival. She closed the distance between them, close enough to see the exhaustion and grief and something else in his dark eyes. My debts are paid. The contract is over, but I think I'd like to stay anyway. Why? His voice was rough, disbelieving, like he couldn't quite accept that someone would choose him without coercion. Sloane took his hand, the one that had held a gun and signed death warrants, and pulled her from a marble floor when her world was ending. Because somewhere between the performance and the reality, I forgot which was which. And I don't want to remember. Lucian's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone where the bruise from Genevieve's slap had finally faded. If you stay, it won't be for cameras. It won't be an act. I know. The world I live in is dangerous. There will be more nights like this one. More enemies, more threats, more violence. I know. Sloane repeated, holding his gaze. And you'd choose it anyway. Choose me. Instead of answering with words, she leaned up and kissed him. Not for cameras, not for performance, but because she wanted to. Because he'd become something she hadn't expected and didn't fully understand, but couldn't walk away from. Lucian kissed her back like she was something precious and breakable, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and choosing this and choosing him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Stay, not because you owe me, because you want to. I want to. For however long you'll have me. Then I think we should renegotiate the terms of our arrangement. Don't miss the next part of this story where everything changes again. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update. Comment below and tell us what you think happens next. Does Sloane's choice lead to happiness or more danger? Your engagement keeps these stories coming, so hit that subscribe button and let's build this community together. 6 months passed like a dream, or maybe like waking up from a nightmare into something better. The federal investigation concluded with Lucian's empire not only intact, but legitimized. His businesses restructured and cleaned up in ways that made the prosecutors look like they'd wasted taxpayer money chasing ghosts. The Hartwell family's conspiracy unraveled publicly, taking down old power structures and making room for new alliances. Genevieve disappeared into federal custody, facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder that would keep her locked away for decades. The tabloids loved every minute of it. The Mafia king and his pure-hearted fiancée, the redemption story of the decade, proof that even the darkest souls could find light. But that wasn't the story that mattered to Sloane. The story that mattered was smaller, quieter, more personal. It was Remy's laughter echoing across a Mediterranean villa, his skin tanned and healthy, kicking a soccer ball with an energy he hadn't had in years. It was the scans that came back clean, the word remission becoming cured. The miracle of watching someone come back from death's door and actually live instead of just survive. It was late-night phone calls where Remy talked about college applications and soccer tryouts and all the normal teenager problems that felt like gifts after so long spent discussing treatment options and pain management. It was Sloane standing on a terrace overlooking turquoise water, wearing white linen and the simple platinum band Lucian had offered her 6 months ago. Not as a contract, not as a trap, as a choice. The investigation is over. Lucian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back into his solid warmth. The enemies are gone. The contract is finished, Sloane. You're free to go if that's what you want. She turned in his arms to face him, seeing vulnerability in his eyes that would have been impossible to imagine that first night in the SUV. And if I don't want to go, then I'd ask you to marry me. For real this time. He pulled back slightly, giving her space to choose. Not for cameras, not for redemption or narratives or anything except us. Just two people who found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it work. Sloane looked at the man who had started as her captor and become her sanctuary. The man who had bought her debt but earned her heart. The man who had given her brother a future and given her a reason to believe in impossible things like second chances and redemption and love that grew from the strangest soil. Then my answer is yes. She kissed him as the Mediterranean sun set in shades of gold and crimson over water so blue it hurt to look at. From the villa lawn, Remy whooped and cheered, healthy and whole and alive, and everything Sloane had fought for. Elena smiled from the doorway, her knowing eyes suggesting she'd predicted this outcome from the beginning. And somewhere in the distance, a new chapter began, not written by contracts or performance or necessity, but by choice. True power, Sloane had learned, wasn't found in what you could buy or control or force into submission. It was found in what you were willing to protect, in the sacrifices you made for the people you loved, in the courage it took to choose vulnerability over safety. Lucian had given her a future when she had none, had saved her brother's life without demanding anything she wasn't willing to give. But she had given him something far more valuable in return. A reason to be better than the monster the world expected. A reason to choose love over survival, trust over control, hope over the cynicism that had defined him for so long. And in the end, that made all the difference. If this story touched you, subscribe and turn on notifications because we've got more stories coming that will inspire, challenge, and move you. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. What would you have done in Sloane's position? Would you have taken the deal? Would you have stayed? Your comments inspire us and help others who are watching. So don't hold back. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. And let's keep building this community of people who believe in second chances and the power of choosing love, even when it's terrifying. See you in the next story.